welcome to the English News of the Hour, coming to you live from the studio here in Tigray Television. I'm Salome Tigrai and I'll be reading the news for the hour. Stay tuned. The Global Society of Tigrayan Scholars and Professionals issued a letter to the head of mission of UNHCR in Sudan, Alex Bishop, asking for the improvement of living conditions of Tigrayan refugees in eastern Sudan. The society said it is sad to learn that refugees such as those in Rakuba often eat once a day on top of the absence of adequate health services. The society recalled that it had sent a letter to the office regarding the quantity of the food basket supplied to refugees and quantity of shelters based on field assessment made by diplomats from donor countries who officially expressed concern about the quality of the services. The society called on the UNHCR to improve the quality of shelters and restore the standard monthly rations so that nutritional status of children, pregnant women and lactating mothers does not deteriorate. On Monday, over 15 civil society organizations sent a letter to the Special Representative Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict asking for the provision of services to the survivors of conflict-related sexual violence in Tigray. The organization stated that there is yet to be concerted effort by the international community as per the international laws and standards. Abel Zagabo has the details.
On Monday, more than 15 civil society organizations issued a letter to Office of Under Secretary General, Special Representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict, asking for the provision of essential services to survivors of conflict-related sexual violence in Tigray. The organization said that the siege imposed on Tigray is devastating the lives of civilian populations, especially survivors of sexual violence that are being doubly victimized through the deliberate denial of essential medical supplies and mental health support. The organization called the United Nations Security Council to put up into effect resolutions 1325 and 1820 to ensure unfettered humanitarian access and to provide protection for the women and girls in Tigray. They also asked for the restoration of basic services including health care and psychological support for survivors of conflict-related sexual violence in Tigray. The letter said that there is yet to be concerted effort by the international community for the prioritization of Tigray in the enactment of the recommendations listed by the Secretary General of the United Nations, especially in ensuring adequate funding for the comprehensive and quality multi-sectoral assistance and protection for the survivors of conflict-related sexual violence and children. Finally, the organization pleaded for the recognition of the rights of women and girls in Tigray who have been rendered inaccessible and who have been denied all basic services.
The 8-month-long occupation of Tigray by allied Ethiopian and Eritrean forces was characterized by the deliberate destruction and looting of health facilities. This, followed by a year-long siege that has prevented the entry of medical supplies and other basic items, has depleted life-saving medications across the state. Our reporters visited the dialysis center in Eider Comprehensive Specialized Hospital, where they spoke with patients receiving treatment. The patients tell us that the siege has severely affected them and many other kidney patients. Saron Tsagay has more.
Nugusa Abrihu and Ababa Haile are kidney patients. We found both of them in Eider Comprehensive Specialized Hospital in the dialysis unit. Ababa is a 19-year-old student from Yejela in central Tigray, and Nugusa is a farmer from Raya Azabo in southern Tigray. They both traveled miles to the capital to get dialysis treatment here in Eider.
I was a farmer. I didn't go to school, so I worked as a farmer. I used to work as a daily laborer as well. I used to help myself and my family doing different jobs. But when the problem with my kidney started, I couldn't do all of that. Now, I even use a can to move around.
Ababa started getting dialysis in the beginning of the war on Tigray. She says she has to come to Magala to get the treatment with her mother once a week, but that the expensive traveling cost has made the process difficult for her.
We pay around 650 birr for one trip to get here. I don't come here alone. I come with my mother, so we pay around 1,300 birr for one trip for the both of us. Before the siege, it used to cost us only 100 birr. We are now selling our properties to get the treatment.
Nugusa also travels from Kukufto around 100 kilometers to the dialysis center in Magala. Due to lack of fuel, Nugusa says he's paying thousands for one trip. Nugusa, a father of 6, says one of his children is also diabetic and that he sometimes skips treatment in order to save money for his son's insulin fee.
I have 6 children. 6 of them are underage, so they can't help me with anything. One of my children is diabetic. So whenever I get money, I use it to pay for his treatment because I don't want to see him dead. I have to get dialysis once a week, but sometimes I get the treatment once in 2 or 3 weeks. I skip my treatment to save money for his treatment. I would rather die than watch him die.
Ababa on her part says that her families are selling their house in Yaj'ala to pay for her expenses.
My parents are struggling to keep me alive. We are now selling our house to cover my expenses. If it wasn't for the siege, I could have gotten better treatment somewhere else. I could have gotten a kidney transplant even in Addis Ababa. But now, we can't even call our families abroad to ask for money, let alone get a transplant.
The patients tell us that many like them have died since June of last year due to the siege.
There were 3 patients who used to come from Alamata with me. 2 of them have died. Both of them were very young. Before the start of the war, our government used to provide ambulance for patients like me. It used to bring us here to get the treatment. But since the start of the war, the cost for transportation has become so expensive. Both of my friends died because they couldn't afford the treatment and the transportation anymore.
It's very hard. Many patients who used to get dialysis with us have died. We are now waiting for our turn because the situation that we are in is so hopeless. Getting dialysis while living under siege is very difficult.
The patients tell us that medical supplies are running low and that they're waiting for their deaths just like many of their friends. They called on every concerned body to end the siege and allow the delivery of medication into Tigray.
I want the international community to hear us and help us. There are a lot of people here who have barely begun to live. A lot of people with hopes and plans for the future. I myself am so young. I have dreams to chase. So I want to say, please help us. Save us.
Rape has been used as a means of intimidating and persecuting Tigrayans in the 8-month-long occupation. Many Tigrayan women and girls were subjected to rape, sexual violence, and torture solely due to their Tigrayan identity. Our reporters spoke to one survivor of sexual violence that tells us soon after Eritrean soldiers killed her son, Ethiopian soldiers took turns raping her for many days. Sarah Kallali reports.
Hiwot is a 40-year-old single mother of 3. Before the start of the war, Hiwot used to work as a merchant and support her 3 children alone. On the onset of the war, Eritrean and Ethiopian troops would bombard her town, forcing her and her family to leave their home. Hiwot would then run away to hide in her relative's house, but would get separated from her 19-year-old eldest son on the way.
It was on the 25th of November. It's been almost 2 years. They came to our area from 2 sides. Abi's soldiers on one side and Isaias's on the other. When they came, we fled to the wilderness. I got there on the 25th and left on the 28th. For 3 days, we didn't leave the house. I sneaked out of the house, but outside, it was deserted. My son was nowhere to be seen. I went back into the house and a gun was fired at me and I fell on the floor. The man who fired at me asked what was wrong with me. I told him I had lost my son and that I was looking for him. He asked me whether I was a spy. I told him I was not, and that I was simply looking for my son. He said he was suspicious of me and took me with him.
The Eritrean soldier would later take Hiwot to a military camp where she would witness the body of her son and her neighbors lying on the ground.
He said, if you say your son has died, come take a look. He was an Eritrean soldier. When I got there, I saw so many dead bodies lying on the ground, all of them residents of my town. Then I saw my son's body. I screamed, and he hit me on the back of my head with his rifle. I fell on top of my son's body, and 2 of my front teeth fell out. I asked the soldier to kill me. I told him I didn't have a reason to live anymore. He wouldn't spare me a bullet. I saw even more bodies lying on the ground. All were from my town. I screamed even more. I saw my neighbor with 2 of her children lying there.
Hiwot's agony would not end here. She says she was dragged away by Ethiopian soldiers moments after seeing her young son's body. She would then be held in sexual slavery and then gang raped for days while being accused of being a junta.
Then Amharic-speaking soldiers came. 7 of them dragged me away and raped me multiple times. I was not aware of what was happening to me. I was crying after seeing my son's body. I don't remember well, but after some days, they dragged me away and left me at my house. We are doing this to you because you're born from a junta, they would say. When I asked them why they wouldn't spare a bullet for me, they said it was all because I was a junta.
Hiwot says, after the assault, she became sick and hid in her house for months in fear of being seen in that condition. She says soldiers would come to her house and slaughter her sheep, steal her grains and her gold.
I became sick and mentally unstable. I locked myself inside the house for fear of people seeing my condition. On top of that, the soldiers would come to my house and slaughter my sheep, steal my grains and my gold, and continue to assault me.
Justice is yet to be served for tens of thousands of women like Hiwot, who have been doubly victimized as they have been subjected to sexual violence and their family members killed with impunity.
Pediatric hydrocephalus has been prevalent in Tigray since before the war, with up to 54% of pregnant mothers being diagnosed with folic acid deficiency, one of the main causes for the disease. According to studies, 96% of these cases are preventable through folic acid supplementation and through surgical operation following birth. But today, well over a year since the start of the siege, doctors tell us they simply have no supplies by which to treat the disease and are being forced to send infants and families back home without any care. Sarah Kalali.
These are Gurush and Elsa, a young couple from Qolla Tembe, central Tigray. We found them at Ida Referral Hospital in Maqala, seeking treatment for their 1-month-old daughter. Their daughter has been diagnosed with hydrocephalus. Hydrocephalus is a common pediatric neurosurgical condition. It is a condition in which there is a buildup of cerebrospinal fluid in the brain. This fluid surrounds the brain and the spinal cord and cushions and supports them. When there is a buildup of this fluid due to blockage, problem with absorption, or overproduction of the fluid, it puts pressure on the brain, causing it to enlarge. Doctors have informed Gurush and Elsa that their daughter's condition has developed to such a degree that she will need a surgical operation. Impossible due to the siege on the region that has depleted all medical supplies.
I came from Qolla Tembe. The health facility at Adi referred us to Ida Hospital. They told us she had complications related to her back and that she would need surgery. When we came here, the doctors told us there was no medication. They told us there was a tube that needed to be inserted, but that they don't have it. They told us to wait because there had been others that had come here before us. We are simply waiting.
According to experts at Eider Specialized Hospital, the condition has been prevalent in Tigray since even before the start of the war, with up to 54% of pregnant mothers being diagnosed with folic acid deficiency, one of the main causes for the disease. Dr. Hafto Haila, a pediatrician at Eider Hospital, says cases of hydrocephalus have been relatively high in Tigray. What has changed now is the capacity of the health system to take measures to treat the disease.
Especially in our case, which is epidemic and very prevalent. This I can tell you from the previous studies that was conducted in our setup. So in that study, the neurological defects, the prevalence was 131 from 10,000 births, including stillbirths and live births. The prevalence of neurological acid defects is increasing definitely in our community, generally in Tigray, we can say, because one is we are not doing the preventing measurements like folic acid supplementation during the early ANC follow-up, or we don't have also the current health facilities that would suffer for the planned pregnancy. So if we have planned pregnancy, if mothers have planned pregnancy, they will take the folic acid, then we can't prevent significantly.
We spoke to Dr. Mihret Abhaila, a neurosurgeon at Eider Hospital. He says approximately 10 children are brought in with the condition every week to the hospital, but due to the lack of medical supplies necessary for surgical operation, specifically a tube called a VP shunt necessary to drain the cerebrospinal fluid, they are simply being forced to send mothers back home.
In Eider Referral Hospital Neurosurgery department, we have 2 clinics in a week, twice. So in every clinic almost at least 5 kids come to our clinic. What we do is we just counsel them. Previously, before the advent of the war, we had these VIP shunts. They were coming, they were being provided to us for free with donation, and without any payment, these children with hydrocephalus were being treated. And but now there is no way in to Tigray. There is no way to bring this material. So what we are telling them in practically is just we are not currently doing these procedures and just to go back home. And it's very difficult practically counseling mothers, and there is no way to treat this kid. It's very difficult, but that's what we are doing. And almost like 10 kids, the minimum 10 kids per week, we are sending them back home without any management.
The cases will be increased, but we are not managing. So we are losing many neonates and children from this most treatable entity. This is happening in our setup. The other is also even the number also could be increased because they are not also coming to our setup. One, they know that we are not treating such cases, and the other is they have also the difficulty with transportation and with banking also and other services, telecommunication. So we are not assessing all the cases.
Hydrocephalus is just one of the many illnesses that Tigray's health system is no longer equipped to treat, leaving families like Gersh and Elsa helpless and desperate for assistance as the siege continues to deplete what little supplies are left in Tigray.
The deliberate and systematic destruction of health facilities, coupled with the more than 13 months-long blockade of life-saving medications, vaccinations, and other medical supplies, has resulted in the steady rise of various infectious diseases that were previously on their way to being eradicated. We visited Eider Hospital and spoke to their top infectious disease expert that says war and displacement has made all communities more vulnerable to diseases. Let's take a look at the report. Malaria is an infectious disease commonly transmitted by a bite from an infected Anopheles mosquito. For decades, Tigray's health system had focused primarily on the prevention of the disease, by providing mosquito nets and insect repellents to at-risk communities. However now, says Dr. Haile Gabremeskel, head of the Infectious Diseases Unit at Eider Comprehensive Specialized Hospital, the infectious disease is now spreading at a rapid rate.
The disease transmission or pattern in our setup is more of unstable transmission. It is year-round, but there are seasons during which there is a peak of malaria cases, usually from September to December and around April and May, following the rainy seasons in the summer and also rainy seasons during March. Now, in the season that we are in, the summer season, we are seeing more cases different from the previous pattern. War in general results in displacement of the vector. Every activity related to war, including digging of forts and mass movement of people. As we know, there are many internally displaced people, so the displacement, migration, climate change and deforestation, as well as destruction of the environment due to bombing also, results in destruction of the habitat of vector, so displacement of the vector is there.
Dr. Haile also discussed the impacts of the high number of displaced persons from areas where malaria was highly prevalent, saying this would increase the risk for host communities where malaria was uncommon.
People who are not getting appropriate treatment for malaria, this will be the reservoir for malaria transmission, and to make it worse, like we have people living in IDP settlement sites. These are people who were displaced from the western part of Tigray. So we see cases from this IDP settlement sites with cases of P-vivax, Plasmodium vivax malaria. They have relapses of this disease, and they didn't get appropriate eradication therapy with primaquine. So these are the reservoir, and they will result in transmission of the disease in the community. So even if we don't see malaria commonly in Mekelle, the mass displacement have resulted in possible transmission of malaria, because the fact that there is mosquito does not mean there will be malaria. There should be also a source or a potential reservoir, and currently the failed vector control strategies and the presence of potential sources and lack of treatment has resulted in increased incidence of malaria.
Leishmaniasis, another infectious disease spread through insects, has started to spread at a rapid pace in areas previously uncommon, while the lack of anti-leishmaniasis medication is forcing many to go on without them.
In our setup, usually the transmission is from infected humanus to uninfected humanus by the sandfly vector bite, and these untreated cases are the reservoirs for the leishmania organism, which are resulting in more transmission. So the presence of many untreated cases, cutaneous as well as visceral, and the spread of the vector from usual habitat is resulting in more cases of visceral leishmaniasis and also the cutaneous form.
Dr. Haile stresses that Tigray's health system, crippled by the ongoing siege and the deliberate destruction of its infrastructures, will need the assistance of all concerned bodies to curb the spread of infectious diseases.
In either hospital specifically, we are encountering huge challenges with regard to infectious diseases care. We have lack of antibiotics, basic supplies, and we are being challenged by epidemic-prone diseases, zoonotic diseases, and as I have said, malaria and DVL. And we have lack of appropriate medications, and I kindly request all concerned bodies and the Minister of Health, Ethiopian Minister of Health, and WHO and other NGOs to support us supplying the appropriate medications and supplies.
Religious leaders from Inter-Religious Council of Tigray appreciated the efforts of the government of Tigray to hold peace talks with the Ethiopian government. The religious leaders called on the Ethiopian government and the international community to work towards a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Haile Gabru has more.
Religious leaders from Tigray Inter-Religious Council appreciated the government of Tigray for its readiness to hold peace talks with the Ethiopian government. The religious leaders have acknowledged and supported bold steps taken by the government of Tigray and added that negotiation and political dialogue should be the only way forward.
The government of Tigray is calling for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Therefore, we call on the Ethiopian government to take the same measures. We support the stand and the initiation of the government of Tigray in resolving the conflict.
We support the readiness of the government of Tigray to settle the conflict peacefully. We also call on other Ethiopian religious leaders to learn from their previous mistakes and preach for sustainable peace. The visit of the special envoy from the European Union and other members of international community to Mekelle and their discussion with the government of Tigray give us a glimpse of hope for peace. This should be consistent.
You cannot bring sustainable peace unless justice is ensured. The readiness of the government of Tigray for peace talks shows us that they believe in bringing sustainable peace through dialogue. We also expect the Ethiopian government to take the same action.
Tigray Inter-Religious Council says the denial of access to basic services such as banking, electricity, and communications and the deliberate blockade of humanitarian aid has made the lives of Tigrayans intolerable and continues to block the way for peace process.
There are preconditions that must be fulfilled ahead of the negotiation. First, a ceasefire agreement has to be signed. Then you would come to next step. The war is still affecting the people of Tigray. All basic services have been shut down. The people are suffering from man-made hunger. Therefore, these services must be restored ahead of peace talks.
All basic services have been discontinued in Tigray. Therefore, the services must be restored ahead of peace talks. We also call on the international community to monitor and take part on the negotiation process.
Different religious groups in Tigray have been calling for the peace resolution to the conflict since the beginning of the war. Almost 2 years into the conflict, any peaceful engagement is yet to take place.
That's it for me and the whole team here on Tigray Television. Bye for now.